do you need to come up with a family budget? Well, let me remind myself that home economics is when the married couple is viewed as a base economic unit. It's the opposite of poverty. There's poverty and then there's home economics. You think of a detached house, you have a living room to live in, and a dining room to eat, and a kitchen to support the dining room, and a bedroom to live in. And that's how you come up with the good kind of detached house. You have a bathroom, excuse me, a backyard, and a garage, and a car in a garage. And that car is considered a lot like the farm truck. It supports the family unit. And then, so picture a 1950s American detached house. Go out to the side, start with farming and mining, and then manufacturing, and then wholesale retail and repair, and then retirement, education, and recreation. And doctors and lawyers become a kind of ladder that holds it all together. And it's the Catholic priest that causes it to come into being to begin with. This all comes out of monks and monasteries and popes. It's actually a Catholic thing. It's the God and country, the other intellectual position. And so there's a young couple there, and you're first a normal, well-adjusted person, and that's not a natural thing. Then you will the good of another person. You make money by making other people better off, and you do that because of you hold Christ's divinity as faith. And there's those three things that make up God and country: straightening up your emotions, willing the good of another person, and doing it because Christ rose on the third day. The dot on the lowercase letter I. Then you become if you want to raise the next generation of children, then you might take on the married life as a profession, and motherhood was considered is a profession, and fatherhood. They come together and they become the smallest economic unit, and that's how you get people out of poverty and into plenty. Let me say this again. Pretend you go up to the computer you're listening to this on, you pretend to take out a transistor. You take out a second transistor, and as you took out the third transistor, it's no longer a computer, it's a pile of electronic parts. You put that transistor back in, it's back to being a computer, and there you have the family as a base economic unit. 10-year-olds can't pay for their mommies, and mommies can't go out and work in the factory and take care of their children, and dads can't run the household and work in the factory. And so it clicks. It becomes, you view the married couple as a single person. And that's what was thrown out. In the 1950s, the Communist Party said they would overthrow that. The United States in about 1973, they were rather specific about it, as you remember. And that was when there was a profound change in our country, in the United States. And they threw out home economics in favor of individual rights, and you can just see it falling into a peasant and property class society. In psychology, they threw out the idea of being normal and well-adjusted. It's not a natural thing. And you can see the diagnostic and statistical manual threw that out. And so the idea of being normal is just not in the works. It's not something we consider anymore. And it was one of the things that was thrown out. In law, courts came out and said that there would be no religion in government. And in doing so, they threw out those three things that make up God and country. They threw out a judicial court, a court that will establish facts that are true as true. And they ushered in a sophistical court, a court that will establish facts that aren't true as true. In other words, they institutionalized pulling a bum thrush is what it all comes down to. We have our own lingo, the way of describing it. And so we take a step back and put a priest on one side and a pimp on the other. And the priest says, say what you mean and mean what you say. Everything else comes from the evil one. And the other side is a pimp, and he knows how to manipulate, intimidate, hustle, and con. And in psychology, we have the idea, both the Catholic and the common atheist describe mental illness as the normal taken into the abnormal. It's a short manual definition of mental illness. The Catholics say, hold on here, go backwards. From a cold to the flu to pneumonia, and go backwards from a flu to a cold to just being normal, and the normal is normal but not good enough. For example, sex is just such an easy thing to see. Sit in a chair, close your eyes, fantasize about the gals until you become sexually aroused. Open your eyes and do it again, only this time you're fantasizing about actually getting the gal pregnant. And then you realize that to associate these thoughts, very powerful thoughts in your mind that have to do with getting a gal pregnant, is not a natural thing at all. And now I know what original sin is with a snap of a finger. And so I have to take that into account. Well, I don't have to, I just choose to. And that goes together with the other two things, and that forms God and country. It's actually the Catholic Church that says act rationally and then act with a sense of decency. And it's the atheist that goes in the other direction, play on people's emotions. They have no sense of love in them. Christ is love itself. They have no love in them. They live in the foothills and become a professional consumer while everybody else sits in the valley being professional producers. They either live in housing projects or slums or apartments, and the people in the foothills are either the class of intelligentsia or slumlords, and they're the same group. And so we're going back over here. We realize that it was all thrown out in the 1970s, although they snuck it in on us. And now it's coming to fruition. We're hitting bottom. They push us into a consumption society, and now we're sort of hitting bottom. We have to do something about this. One of the things to do is to realize that they institutionalize putting women, children, and old people back in the workplace. We have to watch the definition of work, but we won't worry about that now. In other words, you're a gal, and you have a child or two, and they're just looking at you for everything. And you're working all day, and then you have to come home and try and be a mother. And you have to come up with money for daycare to watch somebody else raise your child. And you're throwing your hands up. It's past the point of emotion, because the amount of pay you're getting doesn't come close to covering the bills. Well, that's called a class of peasantry. And that's what you've been thrown into. The opposite of that is the women's liberation movement. The bums rushes, they were never in the workplace. They kept saying we were putting gals back in the workplace. They were never in the workplace. They were the professional consumers. And take a look. They have no sense of love in them, no sense of empathy. The first thing they did with a sense of justice is get all the gold and silver and all the gold and real estate they could get their hands on. They started renting out property to other people. They made money by causing other people to have to work more hours. They're not the only ones. There's Harry the hippie and Al the Afro. And if you take a step back and arrange things back along the lines of the classic battle of good and evil, you realize that they're in the same group. They're just part of the same group. Hillary Clinton is actually married to Bill Clinton, and they should hate each other's guts, but they don't. And both of them should, the black civil rights guys like Jesse Jackson should hate both of them, but they don't. They're three peas in a pod. And you wonder why. They all have that in common. They threw out God in a very real way. They separated the act of sex from the act of getting the gal pregnant. They took the normal into the abnormal, and they made money by causing people to have to work more hours. They pushed you into slums, housing projects in Chicago, the most expensive ghettos in the history of human beings on this earth, and people who live in them describe the world they live in terms of hell. And people who control them, they don't live anywhere near there. They live up in the foothills, and all the sex and drugs and graft they can get their hands on. That's actually the intellectuals' way. You have to think about it for only twice, but only for a moment. And you'll realize that when courts came out and said they could have no religion in government, they actually did take a religious position. They took the stereotypical, straight out of the textbook definition of a satanic church. No, we're picking on the gals because we're trying to go back to home economics, where there's a family budget. And so we're asking, if we went there, how much money would you need? If you were to afford a house that's intentionally designed for the people living in it. That's not how it's done these days anymore. Uh, then how much of an income if you had a family budget, how money you have to have in the bank in order to come across with groceries and with clothes and food and shelter, medical care, a car, uh, all the things you need, including a recreation budget. Believe it or not, they used to sit around and talk about what to do with all this recreation time, and they don't do that anymore. They have professional people in the foothills, and everybody else is in dire need. You could work more than 40 hours, and you still aren't going to come close to it. Just so it's said from the point of view of a guy, a lot of guys are becoming fathers to kids they never met 6 months ago, just because they're trying hard to do the right thing. If that's you, then you got to speak up. You don't ask how much money I make. You ask how many hours do I have to work in order to support a wife and 2.2 children. I guarantee you it'll be more than 40. I guarantee you it'll be more than 80. And if you start chiming in, we start putting numbers to this, then we can do something about it. What's wrong? They threw out God and country. They threw out those three things that make up God and country. Straightening up our emotions, willing the good of another person, and doing it because Christ rose on the third day. That sort of infusion, they would say. What do I do about it? Well, you go back to the 1970s, and instead of courts saying there is no religion in government, you say there's only religion in government. Catholic. There's only Catholic in government. Christ is truth itself, so I have a judicial court. It's another episode or another anecdote, but you realize that if there is no Christ, that's the added on thing, that infusion, and that you hold as faith. And take a look. They threw out God and they threw out a judicial court. They threw out the idea of establishing facts that are true as true. They didn't say, I'm an atheist, so but we'll have a judicial court anyway. And the idea of making money by causing people to have to work more hours. They didn't say, I'm an atheist, I'm going to do things the intellectual way, so I'll put you in your own business. They didn't do that. They did the very same things that you would expect them to do if there was no God, if we just lived and died and we were a bunch of cells and all that sort of thing. Another word for that is called a psychopath. Another word for a class of intelligentsia is called a class of psychopaths and sociopaths. Christ is love itself, and so out goes the American Green Berets who defend the poor and the oppressed, and the Perry Mason criminal trial attorney, and the architect that puts you in your own house, and the business puts you in your own business, and in goes people with a completely different attitude, and they do the things they did. And take a look at the women's liberation movement, or the Black Civil Rights Movement, or the Mexican Civil Rights Movement, or the white guys that won. They have no sense of love in them, no sense of empathy, no sense of anything. They just came to a fork, a crossroads, and they chose to change our society into a peasant and property class society with them on top, and couldn't care less about the rest of us. And so we know exactly what's wrong. We know exactly what to do about it, and we know exactly how to do it. And now we have to start doing it ourselves. One of the reasons I can't come on here at a regular time, or I try to on the weekends, is because I do so much babysitting, and I certainly enjoy it, but I certainly don't enjoy the reasons for it. The little young man's mom has no physical ability to come up with daycare and this and that. And take a look. There's a whole class of people now. This is called a class of peasantry. And it doesn't work out. It's not going to work out. They keep it up till society collapses. And then supposedly when everyone's starving, they're supposed to come in and take over, and it goes on from there. Pushing us into the consumption society was something they talked about in the 1970s. And so it's up to us. It's up to you. we shall gather our gang together, and we shall start putting numbers on this. If you're a gal right now and you're in San Diego or in St. Louis or in London, England, you start calling in. This is how much money I need to run a household budget, as if you were running it as a kind of small business, and as if you were trained in it. You were doing it very intentionally. If it was the 1950s post-World War II America, where they were doing things so terribly right, that, by the way, was the top of the class setup. That was the one where we had this huge middle class, and we were so far ahead of everybody else in the world, including the communist countries, the intellectual countries, and Europe, that it was silly. And we don't live that way anymore. They dragged us down into their world instead of us pulling them up into our world. And we're paying the price for it. So we're going to try and do things. We have a Facebook and an Instagram called Time to Act. And we have a YouTube channel, The Priest and the Pimp. And we have to get you to join our gang in the playground. This part of it has to come from us. If you realize that Donald Trump really didn't go from Democrat back to Republican or from liberal back to conservative, but he stood up to a bum's rush. And that's the all-important thing. That's what he did, and that's what we're going to hold him to it. That said, the rest of it has to come from us. So if you're hearing this and you happen to be a gal, or you know a gal and you have children and you're working, you have to start calling in and putting numbers to this. And if you're a guy, you have to start coming up with how many hours you would have to work. You can start adjusting things from then. We'll go to the Supreme Court, and I'm sure they'll realize what they've done, and they'll leave, and we'll replace them with canon law lawyers to make the point, make a very good point. We'll replace them with the Apostles' Creed, and then we'll have the grand deduction, and society will be made up of our citizenry. We have our own culture. We start out with, if you want to be a citizen of the U.S., you have to be a normal, well-adjusted person, even though you're not going to bat 300. And then society is made up of home economics, and then you can accomplish a great deal of many things that way. You know exactly. Picture a young couple trying to buy a couch or two recliner chairs, and you can see all of the farming and mining. You can see all of the manufacturing, all of the stores, all of the people who design couches, all the stores, all geared toward getting that young couple what they want. The rules are the same people that do the producing have to do the consuming. They practice virtues. And so if you're listening to this, hopefully you'll pass a word. We'll see you next Saturday at about 11 o'clock Los Angeles time, and about 7 o'clock in the evening London time, and on Sunday at about 8 o'clock Los Angeles time and about 4 o'clock London time. Meanwhile, please join our group on Facebook and Instagram, and we're going to try and expand from there. And we have about 36 anecdotes that present the position, the priest and the pimp, the priest or the pimp. And so we shall set a date maybe and go and do something about all this.